Christine Kennedy, and on behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and the McMaster Optimal Aging Portal, I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening. This is the final talk in our series, and I'd like to thank you all. Going through the list, I always like to look at the list of people who are attending, and it's so great to see so many people who are returning. You know, this might be your first, your second, your third, maybe you've hit all four of our talks. So thank you so much for returning. And for those who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to welcome you to our health and wellness series. Usually my role is to welcome you all, and then I hand it off to Dr. Anthony Levinson, who moderates. But tonight, I'm doing the moderating, and we have Dr. Levinson in the hot seat. He's going to be presenting to us this evening. Before I turn the mic over to him, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that the land on which this webinar is taking place, I live in Ancaster, which is just up the hill from McMaster. We're all on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Agreement, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and we will send out a link with the recording in an email early next week, or maybe late this week. Tonight's talk on mental health apps and online resources, as you can imagine, led to an unprecedented number of questions. And what we tried to do was to pare these down into sort of larger themes that would be more broadly applicable to everyone. So Dr. Levinson will be addressing some of the questions during his presentation, and then at the end of his presentation, we will go over some of the pre-submitted questions, and then time permitting, we will open it up to live Q&A. So if you do have a question for Dr. Levinson, and we are hoping that we can get to that, please put it in the Q&A, which the little icon is at the bottom. And if you have a question about like a technical question or a question about the webinar, is it being recorded or whatever, if you could leave that for the chat, because Dave and myself will look for sort of technical issues and questions in the chat. For those of you who know Dr. Anthony Levinson, he is a wonderful speaker. He holds the John R. Evans Chair in Health Sciences Educational Research and Instructional Development. And he is an expert in the design, implementation, and evaluation of technology-enhanced learning and performance. His work impacts the spectrum of medical education, including health information and apps to improve patient education. So with this background, he is clearly well-versed in the topic that he is going to talk to us tonight. And on a personal level, he is my sister-in-law's boss supervisor. He is a wonderful man, a wonderful speaker. So excited to learn from Dr. Anthony Levinson tonight. Thanks, Anthony, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Christine, and thanks everybody for joining. Should be mentioned as well, I am also a psychiatrist, so that's part of the reason why I'm here tonight, to talk to you a little bit about mental health apps. So without further ado, we'll launch into it. I do want to mention, though, that toward the end of the talk, we'll be sharing a link to a handout. And in the handout will be links and references for all of the apps that I talk about today. So we'll dive right into a few scenarios to consider. Samantha's 45. She is experiencing a lot of stress at work and with family life. She is hoping to find ways to improve her mental health and wellness. She talks to some of her friends who recommend mindfulness and meditation. They suggest the MindShift app from Anxiety Canada, as well as Headspace. She's got a few different opinions from different friends, and she makes a decision to try these apps out to see if they can help her find a little more balance. Another scenario to consider, though, is John. He's 68. During the pandemic, he noticed that he started to feel lonelier. He began to drink more alcohol. He began smoking more. And he's looking for help with some of these things. Like many people, he's kind of reluctant to talk to his doctor about these things. He feels a bit of stigma, a bit of shame. He doesn't have insurance coverage for private therapists, so he's a bit worried about the money. He lives in a community that is underserviced, and so there's a long wait list for mental health services. And so he tries his hand and looks for apps to see if they can help him to quit smoking and reduce his alcohol consumption. In this third scenario, let's talk about Amanda. And Amanda goes to see her doctor, receives a diagnosis of panic disorder, a specific type of anxiety disorder. And her doctor actually recommends non-medication treatments, including cognitive behavioral therapy. And she, in this particular fantasy scenario, she finds a secure mental health app with that can help to deliver cognitive behavioral therapy. Amanda uses that for tracking her anxiety symptoms, as well as learning about best evidence and treatments for anxiety. She uses the app and communicates her symptoms securely to her doctor, who also monitors symptoms in the app and how she's progressing with her cognitive behavioral therapy. All of that happens securely and linked to the electronic medical record. Periodically, from time to time, if Amanda is not able to make an in-person appointment, they also use the app for secure delivery of therapy as well. So that sounds really swell. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. So unfortunately, there are some important cautions to consider with respect to some of the mental health apps. And one of the things is, part of what we specialize in at McMaster and through the Optimal Aging portal is evidence-based medicine, looking at the highest quality research, things like systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials. In the domain of mental health apps, though, unfortunately, there are not that many very high quality studies that have looked at the effectiveness or even the potential adverse effects of it. It's a little bit like the Wild West still. There's limited regulation. A lot of these apps are considered sort of health and wellness products rather than more like medical devices or medications. So the limitations on regulation don't necessarily afford patients the same protection that you might derive from, a professional or a clinical relationship. There are a few domains where there's potential for harm. So we saw during the pandemic that misinformation, inaccurate information, incorrect information can be, spread quickly through apps and the internet. There are often exaggerated claims from app developers. And it should be mentioned, when we talk about the limited number of high quality studies out there, many of the studies that are done are funded by the app developers, and they might not have many patients in them, but that doesn't stop them from making exaggerated claims on their website or on the app stores. There may be very important security and privacy issues to consider, and I'm going to walk through a few of those in a minute. How is your data being managed? Is it actually still working in a way that is effective? Are people perhaps taking personal data and maybe sharing or selling that data to other third parties? And finally, there isn't as much information, just like I said, there's not that many studies about how useful these tools might be in clinical settings. And I think that's an important thing to consider. So I'm going to talk a little bit in the first part of the talk about how different frameworks for evaluating mental health apps. And then I'm going to give you a bit of a guided tour of some of the most commonly recommended apps or ones for a different range of conditions and contexts. Now, keeping in mind that there tens of thousands of apps in the App Store, and many of them actually are health related and mental health related specifically. We're only going to be able to touch on a small sample so that Christine can get out of here by 8 o'clock tonight. So why you should believe me? Well, Christine, she flattered me. That's all you need to know. I am a psychiatrist. I also have expertise in understanding how technology can be used for education and for clinical care. As part of the process for preparing the presentation this evening, I did review the research literature, including the systematic reviews and trials out there. Because there's not as many good quality research studies, I also did, reviewed the gray literature, looking at app recommendation sites, including patient testimonials, and some of the literature around involving consumers and patients, looked at app rating sites and these various evaluation sites, sampled quite a few. And then also I do have experience in delivering care and recommending certain apps to patients that I'll outline a few of those recommendations. I want to just highlight, though, there are the three scenarios at the beginning, I think, also capture the various scope around this domain. So you may have apps that are more for either prevention or healthy lifestyle, wellness. And I think that's one level of mental health app that is a bit different from the next level or stepped care, where somebody may be having clinical symptoms, anxiety, stress, depression, and they are looking to an app to help them to manage some of those symptoms that may be outside of a clinical relationship, or it's possible that it is in collaboration with their healthcare team. And the third one is a context where somebody has perhaps been diagnosed with a psychiatric condition or a mental disorder, such as Amanda in the scenario with panic disorder, and they could be working with their healthcare provider collaboratively using an app as a tool, or in some cases, they may be getting their treatment delivered through an app. And we'll talk about some of those types of apps as well. When we talk about apps, that's usually short for a software application. And in some cases, those are designed to work just on a native smartphone. Like we talk about native apps that work on smartphones, like an iPhone or an Android device. We might also imagine that some of them would work on tablet computers like the iPad. But sometimes there are also apps that will function over the internet, usually through a browser. We talk about web apps. And then we refer sometimes to hybrid apps, where something you can log in on a computer and record information over the web, but you might also have the same account and the app would function on a mobile device as well. And those might be useful for symptom tracking, where you want to put some data in while you're sitting at a desk and other data while you're on the go using your phone. Importantly, with respect to affordability, while there are some very good free apps, and I'm going to talk mostly, in fact, about freely available ones, there are a lot of paid ones, including some very good ones that are quite pricey. And many of the apps do employ some form of freemium premium model, where you might be able to sample the app for free, but in order to access additional features or to unlock the fully featured version of it, you have to pay a fee. And in many cases now, a lot of apps, like with other software, they've moved to a subscription-based model. I would say, broadly speaking, we can think about two main categories of apps. Some are targeted towards a specific condition. So I'll talk about and mention one for PTSD or chronic pain or anxiety. And others may have a more of a functional designation. They're designed for tracking symptoms, or they're designed for learning a skill like mindfulness or meditation. There are the other types of apps that I think are really important, especially when there isn't as much data to support sort of standalone ones or direct to consumer, are apps that connect you to a provider. And so I think that's a very important type of app that is not always thought of in the conversation around mental health apps. Okay, so with that little bit of intro, I want to quickly walk through a couple of frameworks for thinking about the evaluation of apps. So the American Psychiatric Association elaborated their app evaluation model, and it actually has fairly widespread adoption. And so a lot of people use that approach. I'm going to walk through the 5 steps of their app evaluation model. So the first step is really, before you do an in-depth evaluation, to look at the background related to it. And I have the little symbol of the nose here because it's like, does this pass the sniff test? Gather some useful information before you go into depth and do a deep evaluation. Who owns it? Who's sponsoring or funding it? Do they seem like a trusted source? Are there going to be hidden fees? So these are all like the sniff test or the crap detection, because there are actually a large number of not very good mental health apps in the App Store. Many of them, it's very hard to even find information about who the provider is. So that preliminary step 1 sniff test, crap detection, if you have enough to go on and you think, okay, this merits another step, the next step is trying to understand privacy and security. Is there even a privacy policy? Are they transmitting, storing your personal health information? And can you opt out of data collection? Not all of the mental health apps do collect data. Some are more push, like educational information, and not necessarily you storing information about mental health symptoms. Is data shared or sold to third parties? If you pass the security and privacy step, the next step is evaluating whether it seems to have some foundation in proven treatments. This may or may not be a little more challenging to evaluate if you don't have any clinical background, but there might be certain things like, does it seem to have face validity? Does it come from a reputable source we looked at before, but does it mention other relevant sources or references? Has it been studied, and is there any statement of evidence that comes from an academic institution or a research institute? This is also a point at which you might be having a conversation with a member of your healthcare team if you're unsure about those things. Many apps use principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, which has been well studied and validated in the treatment of anxiety disorders, depression, and others. Step 4 is if you know the app it's met the criteria for privacy and security, and it seems to have some basis in a clinical foundation, is around usability. And this one's a bit more subjective. And, does it seem easy to use? If you download a free trial and you are using it, does it seem kind of intuitive? Does it look like it's going to meet your needs? Does it have features that might let you even personalize the app in some ways? And then the final step is one that, again, is more about thinking about how could you use a mental health app in collaboration with a clinician like your doctor or a mental health specialist. And this is also one where there just hasn't been that much studied. Apps in the clinical setting, are they actually helping to improve the therapeutic relationship and your mental health condition? They shouldn't fragment care. And unfortunately, for symptom trackers, for example, it's not always very easy to securely share data with providers. So, is that a problem? Or is it still something that you can effectively talk about with, your healthcare team, even if you're not securely sharing that data? The other framework that is more of a homegrown one in Canada, the Mental Health Commission of Canada and the CIHR developed a couple of years ago. There's a lot of overlap looking at things like effectiveness and usability, security and privacy, again, a major consideration. What they talk about the functionality, which goes to what I was saying, is it, designed for a specific skill or more for a specific condition? Who's the target user for it? I like that they also included the inclusion, because not all apps are going to be, say, culturally generalizable. So this can tell you a little bit about, how was the app developed? Has it been trialed with different communities and groups? And then they also have price, because I think cost can be a very important issue. And transparency refers to whether or not the developers have cited themselves and the sources and the funding source for the app. So this is quite a nice little framework. And again, all of these resources, the APA framework, the Mental Health Commission framework, I've included all these links in the handout that will be shared at the end. So let's jump in and a little guided tour of some of the apps. And I want to start with a couple of the therapist guided internet CBT apps. So these are Mind Beacon was actually, it was free during the pandemic, but I noticed that just recently it is no longer free for Ontario citizens, but it is available to Canadians. There is quite a lot of evidence to support iCBT, or therapist-guided internet CBT. And I think I guess speaks a little bit to one of my biases, that in terms of delivery of clinical care, that third one, we talked about sort of wellness, self-help, and then more delivery of clinical care. Therapist-guided iCBT has far and away the most evidence to support it compared to just a direct-to-consumer mental health apps. So Mind Beacon, and there's another one from Morneau Chappelle called Ability CBT. Again, both of these are paid services, but many people's insurance and benefits will cover it. They will both service a wide range of different conditions. The Mind Beacon offers different pricing models for what they call guided CBT programs, which involve often using text messaging or email with a trained therapist, versus live sessions, which might include video calls, for example. And as I mentioned, lots of good evidence to support delivery of CBT over the internet with these modalities. And also quite good for access. So you may or may not have access in your jurisdiction to trained in-person therapy. iCBT can offer conveniences and access for many. Just need to make sure that you have can afford it, or can get coverage through benefits or insurance. If you're in Ontario, and I know many of you are from the province, Ontario has a new program, the Structured Psychotherapy Program, that is available in many jurisdictions within the province. And this is therapist-led CBT, and they do offer in-person or online in many of these new programs. So that's a nice, effective OHIP-covered option that is recently been launched in the province of Ontario. I want to talk a little bit about a sort of CBT light model that is more of a coaching type of model, and it's a Bounce Back by the Canadian Mental Health Association. This is a free program managed by the CMHA, focuses a lot on principles of CBT and skill building, available to anybody over the age of 15. There are a lot of high quality CBT-based workbooks, and you can either access just the online videos and workbooks, or you can work with a coach for, I think it's usually up to about 6 hours of coaching over 6 sessions kind of thing. You can self-refer, and there has been some data to show reduction in depressive and anxiety symptoms, and it's been around for a while. So it's great that that's supported across the country through the CMHA. The MindShift CBT app is developed by Anxiety Canada. It is a free app that is useful for a wide range of different anxiety disorders, as well as some skills based on CBT principles, suitable for conditions like panic disorder, social phobia, specific phobias, generalized anxiety disorder. Has a lot of specific tools built into the app, like exposure, guided relaxation, thought journals, goal setting. So a really nicely made, supported, and updated free app with even if you didn't have an anxiety disorder, but were looking for guided relaxation, for example, this would be another good app to try. Mood Mission is one of the better studied and higher recommended ones for depression specifically. You can see it has features for stress and anxiety as well. It's interesting. It works on kind of a what we sometimes call gamification type of mode, and it is not free, although there is a free trial. It gives you activity suggestions, quite well designed from a usability standpoint, and it has been a little bit more studied than some of the other sort of mood disorder or depressive disorder apps. There is a little bit less attention, if you're familiar at all with cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a little more on like behavioral than the cognitive side. And I don't think the gamified approach is going to be for everybody. You know, assigning you a mission if you have a low mood is not great for a distress or a crisis situation, and it might not be a good fit with everybody's preference as far as app structure and function. There are, I would say, in many communities across the country, there are a lack of high quality resources available to people with post-traumatic stress disorder. The Government of Canada and Veterans Affairs Canada collaborated with the US Department of Defense to adapt an app that they had developed called PTSD Coach for their military. And so the PTSD Coach Canada app is freely available to anybody in the country. It is focused a little bit more on combat-related PTSD than other forms of PTSD or other triggers, but it does have, you know, good quality information about PTSD treatments and tools for screening and symptom tracking, as well as information on crisis support. Smoking cessation is one of the areas that has been studied a little more. This is an app called Quit Now that has kind of aligns with the WHO kind of guidance and indicators. There's a freemium premium kind of model that helps you to set goals and track your goals. There is a chat room and, you know, sort of support from a community. And interestingly, many of the ratings and users say, love the app, hate the chat room. And you can't really turn it off, but people hated it so much they would sometimes change the language that it was translating the comments in, so they couldn't understand it. But it has also good recommendations for books. There are other websites as well to help with smoking cessation, but the app has some efficacy data as well. Analogously to some degree, the Saying When app that was developed by CAMH, it has tools to help you quit drinking or cut down on your drinking. Now, interestingly, it was developed by CAMH based on research and the previous low-risk drinking guidelines, as opposed to the newer guidance that was just released by the CCSA. And if you are trying to reduce your drinking, might be better that it's actually based on the lower risk drinking guidelines rather than the slightly more severe new CCSA guidance. So good education information, good tips for success, and tools to help you kind of keep track of your consumption of standard drinks, set goals around it. So not bad, especially if you're maybe aware that there's a bit of problem drinking in your life. I wanted to mention a couple of apps that are very highly rated by consumers. They are not necessarily inexpensive, but I'll mention two subscription ones. Headspace is maybe one of the best known and very highly reviewed. Not cheap, so $89.99 per year or $18 per month, basically. But very high quality, very slick interface, very good usability, guided meditations, tools that people often find helpful to help with sleep or mindfulness training, things that might help focus and concentration. There is also, I think, a series that was available on Netflix. So if you are a Netflix subscriber and you're kind of interested to dip your toes to see what this Headspace thing is all about, you can get a little bit of a feel for what the app is, some of the app content is like through the Netflix series. Two other good mindfulness meditation apps. Calm is quite similar in many respects to Headspace. Similar features, similar price point, but I did notice they actually added a new feature of a family plan as a subscription option. And that actually works out because you can have 6 sort of family or friends on the family plan, which would, when you convert it into Canadian dollars, would be just over $22 per person, which is a pretty good deal. And the Healthy Minds program is another well done, slightly simpler approach based on kind of good science and 4 pillars to focus on. So that's if you're interested to sort of try out a mindfulness or meditation kind of app, the Healthy Minds one would be a good free one to try. And then both Calm and Headspace are probably the 2 most polished apps in this particular space. I want to mention Bearable. There are a number of other like symptom tracker types of apps. Bearable's kind of interesting because of the breadth of different types of signs, symptoms, and other things that it can be used to track. So whereas some symptom trackers are very they're kind of a one-trick pony, track your anxiety symptoms or track your depressive symptoms. The Bearable app can track mood symptoms, activities such as sleep or medication, exercise, food, can integrate with other apps. If you have a watch or a pedometer or a tracker or a blood pressure monitor that has the capabilities. So it's very highly reviewed, and I think it's quite a good one for this type of thing where you might not want to have 4 different apps for tracking 4 different things. But I will say, having tried the freemium version, the ads and that, there's a lot of features in the premium that are not available in freemium, and almost every screen in the free version is sort of prompting you to upgrade. So that aspect gets very annoying in a hurry. So you might be put off by that if you want to try the free version. I'm going to mention a few different ones, and one resource in particular. The mysleepwell.ca is a website produced by Dalhousie, and has some excellent recommended resources related to insomnia based on cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So that's CBTI, which is the most effective treatment for insomnia. And there are several apps that get high praise, not just from the My Sleepwell site, but from other sites. Sleepio is a CBTI based app for insomnia. I've mentioned a couple of the high quality books on the left-hand side as well. Haleo is fairly specialized and not cheap. But it does connect you with a skilled CBTI therapist. So if you've maybe tried other insomnia treatments and they've failed and you can afford it, Haleo might be a good option to access a skilled CBT therapist. Shout out to my colleagues at the Student Wellness Center, and I know there are a few McMaster students and faculty on the joining us this evening. There's a nice suite of recommended apps on the Student Wellness Center site, including a couple that do require you to be a McMaster, like have a Mac ID, but you can also get a subscription. So Tao has a large number, like a catalog of really good videos related to things like grounding techniques and mindfulness exercises. So I think it has hundreds of these short videos with overviews on various key topics. And if you have a Mac ID, you can get access to that when you register. Otherwise, it does require a subscription. There are not that many resources, and this was one of the questions that was sent in advance related to eating disorders, but this is one of the ones that is better reviewed, called Recovery Record. It works ideally with a clinician who is also using the clinician version and sharing the link, but it can be used in a self-directed manner as well, and has CBT, again, based principles related to people who may be struggling with body image or eating disorders. The Be Safe app is another one for people struggling who need like a mental health crisis plan, developed in Canada at Western or in London, as well as in collaboration with CAMH. And it's now available, though, with crisis support resources across all of the Canadian provinces and territories. So if you're somebody, or you know somebody who's really struggling with thoughts of suicide or needs like more of a mental health crisis safety plan, the Be Safe app is sort of purpose-built from that standpoint. There are very few kind of well-designed research apps that might be appropriate or tied to designed for people with cognitive disorders specifically. MindMate is, aligns with some of the science on, dementia risk reduction, cognitive techniques. It is targeted specifically for people living with cognitive impairment and their care partners. It is free. It functions. I don't think there's an Android version of the app, but there is a version that works on desktop, and it has things like nutrition, exercise, brain games, kind of coupled together. It is highly reviewed by consumers as well. A little bit of a plug here. I should have mentioned in my conflict of interest disclosure, I have no relationship with any of the apps that I'm, walking through right now. And this resource, our igerrycare.ca resource, is a free website resource rather than an app, but our igerrycare.ca is designed for free dementia care partner education. It is a web resource. It's on the internet, not an app. Multimedia e-learning lessons, similar to the e-learning lessons that we have on the McMaster Optimal Aging portal. And we also do the occasional live online event and Q&A, and recordings are put on the site. There's also a weekly dementia education email through igerrycare.ca as well. A bit of a shout out here for some of your phone's built-in apps. And I will say this specifically because there were quite a few questions that came in around ADHD or people who might have cognitive impairments. And your phone comes with pretty good built-in apps that can be helpful in some of those circumstances where you might need additional organization. Notes, to-dos, reminders, calendars, alarms, these can all be quite useful things to help with organization, planning, to supplement if you have memory problems. I'll mention To-Do from now Microsoft is actually a free app. Evernote has a freemium and a premium. I personally think Evernote's it's a very good note-keeping outline type of app, but there is a cost for the premium version. But I think let's not overlook some of these. I mentioned as well apps to help keep you from phone overuse. We know that many of us have trouble sort of disconnecting from device. 1sec is one that when you go to open specific apps that you can program, it prompts you to do a short breathing exercise just to be mindful before you go on to use that app or maybe change your mind. Opal is one as well where you can restrict access to certain apps during windows of time if you know you struggle and you're overusing a particular social media app late at night or something like that. And of course there are other non-app approaches, including simple things like putting an elastic band around your phone so that when you reach instinctively to use your phone to check it, you feel the elastic band and you might change your mind. Or there are even lock boxes for people who are really having trouble disconnecting from their device. Not everything has to be an app. In the world of mental health aids, I would say self-help books, especially in terms of workbooks or books based on cognitive behavioral therapy. There are some excellent ones. I've included, we'll share the handout that we shared from our webinar on CBT and anxiety with Dr. Randy McCabe as well, where we had a lot of other suggestions in terms of self-help books. I want to cover a couple more things before we take some questions. There are a couple of quite useful app evaluation clearinghouses like inventories. And then I also don't want to minimize things, apps and websites that and other services that can help you connect to mental health services. So Alberta's Health Services Addiction and Mental Health Apps directory is excellent. They update it periodically. I think it was last updated in January 2023. You can download a PDF, and they also have this interactive sort of searchable, filterable, and sortable online database that's excellent. There's a comparable one through the mHealth Index Navigation database that has, again, similar features to be able to filter and sort by features and functionality and cost. And the cyber guide through OneMind is another very useful inventory with you can sort of filter by particular disorder or principles. In terms of access to mental health services, during the pandemic, the federal government funded Wellness Together Canada, great resource, phone, web, chat. You can access services that way. They also have a companion app that has some good tools and features on it. The PocketWell app, it's also free. 211 is a phone line, just like, there's 411 for information. 211 is you reach a person, and it's pretty much a service that is available through most parts of Canada and the territories, where an expert in community and social service resources can connect you with services that you're looking for. So there's also a 211.ca website, and most provinces have some version of it as well. But I would actually recommend the phone line service because it's just easier to talk to somebody, and they offer services in many, many languages. So if you know somebody who is a newcomer to Canada and doesn't have access to the technology or grasp of English or French, they can still get service in their language, most likely. If you're in Ontario, Connects Ontario has an app and is also very good at, it's essentially a directory that can help you to find mental health, addiction, problem gambling services in the province. And the replacement for telehealth in Ontario is the 811. You can connect with a registered nurse. They do also have online tools for symptom checking, and you can connect to people with connect to a nurse through chat as well. So that is sort of the big overview. In terms of revisiting Samantha, she is in luck in terms of that direct to consumer. There's good apps for mindfulness. She tried out the Mind Shift and some of their guided relaxation. In the end, she really liked the Headspace and found that to be, helpful, uses it at night for sleep. John maybe had a more typical story. He tried out both the Quit Now app for his smoking cessation and the Saying When for alcohol. He actually quickly, like after about 2 weeks, stopped using them. And that's the reality. A lot of people actually abandon their efforts at using an app. However, as part of the process of using them, even for those 2 weeks, he did appreciate that it was worth him talking to his doctor about the issues, and he did eventually get connected with a clinician for support around those things. Amanda's circumstance, the more realistic version of Amanda, is she works with a workbook, the Mastering Your Anxiety and Panic CBT workbook. She works with her doctor, meeting regularly. She does use the Mind Shift CBT app from Anxiety Canada. She finds that helpful for some, reinforcing some of the CBT techniques and relaxation techniques that she learns. And together they work through a more traditional course of therapy, but complemented or augmented by the mental health app. Key take-home messages: there's still a bit too much hype and limited evidence. Apps that can connect you with a trained provider, a trained therapist like iCBT, have the most evidence, especially if there's a clinical diagnosis rather than sort of a wellness type of approach. Few at this stage integrate with electronic medical records. Try an app before you think about buying, and then consider some of the tools within your smartphone already if you're looking for things that might help you organize your thinking or help with memory functions. The apps that have a specific tool or technique might be easier to integrate into a clinical relationship. So, rather than an app that's going to, do everything for depression or do everything for anxiety, maybe an app that helps you to track symptoms and share that with your clinician, that might be helpful. Don't forget about some of the excellent CBT-based workbooks. And I encourage you to check out the clearinghouses if you're looking for an app for a specific condition. Also keep in mind, as I said, a lot of people, like John in the scenario, they abandon the apps after not long. So the best app is one that you can stick with that meets some of those steps and passes the sniff test. There's a lot of, I think, future areas of interest. There really needs to be improved research, like higher quality randomized controlled trials, as well as more qualitative research to understand what, how does this affect the doctor-patient relationship if an app is being used as part of that relationship. We've talked mostly about things like monitoring of symptoms or some elements around treatment. There's increasing interest in apps and use of artificial intelligence in relation to prevention or assessment features. And it's a whole can of worms around chatbots and their use in healthcare generally, or mental health care specifically. So thank you so much. And I apologize for taking up so much time, but there were a lot of apps to get through, only 10,000 more to review. We'll move to some Q&A and discussion now.
That's what you can do in your retirement, Anthony. You can just go through those 10,000 apps.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for that. We have lots of questions, but first, as I mentioned, we're going to go through the pre-submitted because we wanted to get to those because we could see sort of the themes that people were hitting upon. So first sort of big question that we've narrowed down. What do you recommend for people who don't have a lot of experience with using technology or who are not comfortable with using technology due to privacy issues? Big question, right? Privacy.
Yeah, and I think not all apps are asking you to record information. So some apps might be, sharing a skill with you, teaching you mindfulness or meditation, or offering you things that will help with sleep rather than recording your symptoms. So I think look at the context around the app. Is it providing, useful education without necessarily putting the onus on you to put information there? And then the other thing is, can you find credible information on the developer's website about their privacy policies? But if you're still very skeptical, as I say, avoid apps where you are required to share personal health information.
Right. And it's probably worth reading. Many of us, I think we fall victim to, they give you this tiny, tiny little document with little font and I agree,
Oh
right?
yeah, the standard form agreements are notorious for that. But in this case, especially if you are talking about putting in personal health information, you can always scroll down to sort of like the privacy or data sharing, or often on the developer's website, they will publish the privacy policy separate from the larger standard form agreement. But I can tell you, when I was evaluating these apps for tonight, I did not check out the privacy policy of every single one.
Yeah. You get your magnifying glass and you'd be there for another
Exactly.
5 hours. So the other big themed question that we've sort of narrowed down to one easy question is, what should a person do if they have more than one mental health issue, right? A lot of mental health issues have comorbidity.
Yeah, and I think that this concept of comorbidity, or having, more than one mental health issue or health issue, it definitely adds complexity. And so I think, as we saw with that sort of step model, once you start moving from wellness and sort of well-being to even self-help, I think you need a few more cautions and safeguards. And then once you move beyond that to this notion of, more than one, psychiatric condition or health condition, maybe because I think one of the other questions that had come in was somebody talking about, treatment resistant depression. So at that point, you're really talking about a more complex situation where I think any apps are probably best used in conjunction or in collaboration with your healthcare team, because I think, there's not a ton of evidence around many of these mental health apps just for like treatment of one condition, let alone if you add in the complexity of more than one. Now, that doesn't mean that there couldn't be a role. If somebody had, say, depression and alcohol use, there couldn't be a role for the, Saying When app to help with reduction in alcohol. Or, if somebody had more than one anxiety disorder, they might still benefit from, the Mind Shift app for some of those CBT techniques. But if there's more complexity or, treatment resistance, you're probably looking at a situation where the app should be used in conjunction with a clinical therapeutic relationship.
Great. Well, I'm hoping that answers that for all those who asked that question, that very thorough answer, and not a simple one, unfortunately, right? It's not, apps can't just replace good therapy.
Yeah, and I do think, though, I wouldn't want to minimize the challenges that people experience around access to care. So, it's very easy to say, oh, apps should not replace, your care with a mental health clinician or therapist. But, for many people, they're not able to access care, easily or affordably, or they're on wait lists. So, I do appreciate why people who might have, treatment resistant conditions, or people who are struggling and waiting months to see somebody might be interested in finding things. And I think there's a role for some of these mental health apps to either help while you're on a waiting list, or to help reduce symptoms, or to track it. And then I do think it's excellent that there are things like Wellness Together Canada that might help find people services, and the province of Ontario's approach, and I think other provinces as well, to try to increase access to structured psychotherapy, including using apps for kind of virtual care.
Great. Okay. Thank you. You sort of alluded to the treatment-resistant depression. So we did have questions about that. So first, what is this? And second, what would you recommend in such a case?
Yeah, so just to kind of restate that, when we use the term treatment resistant, we're really talking about somebody who has, tried usually the first line treatments, and maybe in some cases second line or third line treatments, and they are still having ongoing symptoms of their disorder. So when treatment resistant depression, these are people who may have tried multiple different medication trials. They may have tried psychotherapy in addition. So there are no easy answers in relation to mental health apps. I think usually, again, ideally people would have access to specialized care, because we have, in many centers, there are clinics that specialize in, mood disorders like major depression, including patients who have not responded to treatment. There are other, treatments that population would go down the line in terms of trying. But in those cases, it's very unlikely that a mental health app without a lot of proven efficacy would be the solution.
We did have lots of questions about, people wanting to help other people. When should people suggest to other people about seeing a doctor? Like, when is it important to say, listen, you need medical intervention, you need to see some healthcare providers?
I think that's a good question. It really is probably somewhere in that gray zone. If you look at that 3 steps between wellness to self-help to a clinical diagnosis or a clinical disorder, it's probably somewhere in overlapping the self-help range. If somebody's starting to have more and more, mental health symptoms such that it's interfering with their quality of life and their function, then there could be merit in having a medical assessment, like a comprehensive assessment, to, one, rule out that there's not a medical issue causing some of the symptoms. So there are many, mental health symptoms that can be caused by clinical conditions. So if you have a hyperthyroid condition with too much thyroid hormone, well, that can mimic the symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder. So it is very important to make sure in a comprehensive assessment that you don't have an underlying medical condition that is causing the symptoms. So I think if you're having more and more symptoms and they're interfering with your function, seeing a medical professional to have a comprehensive assessment to determine whether or not, first rule out a medical issue or a substance issue, but also to, make a positive diagnosis. And then there's maybe a role for, different treatments and self-help as part of the treatment plan.
Great. Okay. So looking for a sort of dysfunction. This was a great question. So, because it's in the news quite a bit about psychedelics. Like, to treat mental illness these days. Are there any apps associated with this type of treatment?
Such an evolving, like a new and emerging area, the use of it's an old area and a re-emerging area, but the use of psychedelics in controlled circumstances for treatment of conditions like PTSD, or in some cases, treatment-resistant depression. So I would say the area right now is just too new for it to be represented in a reliable kind of app. I would say if you're interested in something like this, it's really being done in controlled ways in Canada in specialized centers. And your best bet is to connect with one of those centers to find out if this is an appropriate treatment that you might be eligible for. But it's really still too new, I think, to be captured within any kind of mental health app. I've not come across one yet that has sort of reliable information about psychedelics.
Okay, that's interesting. And the last one, we had a number of questions about ADHD. So are there any appropriate apps, to help?
I think some of those productivity tools that I mentioned
Yep.
as well. So like the note keeping, using a calendar to structure things, using reminders. So many people with ADHD find those sort of typical productivity tools, including the Evernote for outlines and notes. There is a specialized app called Inflow that is sort of has some research evidence, and depending on your subscription model, it can get quite pricey. I can't remember if I think it's about $200 a year or so. But I think at the higher subscription rates, it might even connect you with a coach, as well as having additional, tools and features that are ADHD specific. So I'd say one general range of good quality productivity tools, and two, the Inflow one is sort of the expensive subscription specialized ADHD app.
Okay, great. Well, that concludes. I'm just mindful of the time. Maybe I will ask one question, because I am seeing sort of a theme again,
Sure.
another big theme in the questions. If you're familiar with any apps that sort of deal with grief, death, loss.
That is a really good question, and I am actually not aware. I often refer people to bereaved they're usually Bereaved Families of Ontario as an organization. They have local chapters. I believe there are actual, same thing across the country. I will say that this, especially if the grief is more prolonged, this might be a good one for like an internet CBT type of relationship, or an internet-based therapy. Those many people do find groups and connecting with others who are going through the same thing to be beneficial, which I think is one of the powers of sort of the community groups around bereaved families. But I'm actually not aware of a specific app around that. I will do a little bit more research and see if I can find one, but I didn't find one in when I was looking at this time. There are some specific types of evidence-based psychotherapies if you're having depression related to grief or bereavement. Interpersonal therapy is one of those.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for your honesty and not trying to pawn off,
That's
one that you're working on in the basement.
No. So.
Okay, I do want to just let people know that lots of questions came in about specific sort of disorders like OCD, and so I don't think we have the time to get into specific. I did put in the chat though that if you're looking for particular conditions, that there was, where did I put it in? Somewhere in there.
Yeah, the app evaluation inventories are a good one if you are looking. So again, in the handout, and I think you've shared the handout. In the handout, I included the links to all of the those app inventories, the one from Alberta Health, as well as Mind and the Cyber Guide. And those do enable you to look for and filter by different clinical conditions. I did not find enough compelling data on OCD to recommend a specific app in there. But there are also some very good self-help books that use principles of CBT. If you have OCD, this would, I think, also be a good one to connect, if you are connected with a healthcare team or clinician, to ask them if they have a specific recommendation, so that you can kind of work more collaboratively with the clinician as well. So the handout is, I think there are 2 handouts being shared in the chat, but they will also be shared in the follow-up email. And the handout from today's does have the links. So.
Yeah, so maybe I'll post that again.
I will say I saw one, one of the links that we wanted to share was to look for future topics for these collaborative portal and alumni association webinars. And so as we cover various topics, because I did see the link about apps related to chronic pain, as we cover topics, that's one of the topics that I had put on the list of rank ordering for future ones. We'll try to capture, helpful resources, including apps that might tie in with that. I think I did put in the list of things, some of the workbooks, and Managing Pain Before It Manages You is a very good one related to chronic pain.
Okay, so everyone, I just put in a link there, which is the survey that Anthony just mentioned. So if you have a second, if you want to fill that out, that would be very helpful.
I will just do just a very quick plug as well for the portal, for those of you who are less aware of the portal itself. Some of the portal itself and the landing page, you can subscribe to our weekly email alerts with new content being delivered, various types of content on the portal, including the video post. The recording of this webinar will be posted both on the Alumni Association YouTube channel. We'll also be publishing it as a post on the portal's video post, and we'll include the handouts on that as well. We also do have some e-learning content, most recently the delirium e-learning lesson. And then, as mentioned, we will post the talk on our YouTube channel. I think I did mention tonight Dr. McCabe's webinar on CBT and anxiety. So there's some useful resources, and we'll be reposting the handout from that talk as well.
Yes, and I can also post if people don't get the links that I put in the chat. Don't worry, I can send it all in the follow-up email. So you'll get an email with a link to this talk. I'll put in a link to the 4 talks that Anthony had just put up. We'll put in the survey, the resources, and the anxiety disorder. What was it? So it was the anxiety, the
handout from the anxiety
yes.
resources. So
yes,
that'd be great.
So,
no, and I think that, part of the challenge in giving an overview and talking about frameworks and mentioning specific apps is, like, there are thousands and thousands of apps. So I apologize if I was not able to cover like every condition. I tried to pick a smattering of some of the most highly, talked about ones or reviewed ones from a range of different conditions, but I was not able to cover every condition. So.
Yes, well, that's your retirement.
That's right. Exactly.
All right, well, I think we will, it's well past 8, so we'll thank everyone for joining us. Hopefully you were able to get some great information. Thank you, Anthony, for sharing again, all your resources, all your time, your knowledge. Wonderful speaker. We look forward to starting up again in September, in the fall, where we will look at some new topics that people will hopefully have some input in. So go to that survey, answer the survey for us.
Thank you so much. It's been, thanks for spending your evening with us tonight.